Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Slightly different video, but one in which I hope will raise some awareness and help alleviate some stress for any individuals that have been newly diagnosed with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's. It's a bloody nightmare, pardon the pun. As you, I'm sure, are well aware, I was diagnosed about 14 months ago with ulcerative colitis. And it's been some journey over these last 12 months. You know, it's one in which has been met with discovery and an awakening of sorts. You know, I've mentioned on podcast, it's probably the best thing that's happened to me. So try and always see the positive in any form of negative light. But in today's video, for any newly diagnosed individuals, I really want to use my profile to try and raise as much awareness as possible, and as I mentioned, to help alleviate some stresses. So we're going to run through drug protocols, diet, stress, sleep, supplementation for anyone that has been newly diagnosed. And I know what it's like. You know, when I was diagnosed, I was given a pamphlet and I was sent on my way. You know, I've just been given this autoimmune disorder and disease, and here's a pamphlet and I'll be seeing you very soon. And I think it's tough. This is when the psychological component, and I'd love to try and get into contact with government or some form of line of politics whereby we can introduce a bill that any newly diagnosed individual with any autoimmune disorder or disease is given some form of therapeutic help via cognitive behavioral or counseling. One can only dream of that, but we'll come on to discuss how much of an important role that is in mitigation and management of symptoms too. So you've been newly diagnosed, right? And we'll look into prevention as well, but just a brief background as to where my symptoms started to start. My symptoms were left-sided pain, poor digestion, blood in my stool. So the frequency of blood in my stool started to increase at quite a rapid rate. Now, I've been listening to, as you know, a lot of Gabor Mate, and a lot of autoimmune disorders and diseases nowadays stem from trauma, be it childhood, be it acute levels of very, very high stress. And this is why I think these sorts of illnesses and diseases need to be met with compassion as well. If we were a far more compassionate world, I'm sure the instances of diseases like this would massively decrease. But I can pinpoint now, I was going through a very stressful time. I'd broken up with my long-term partner of about 9 years. And I was very isolated. So we moved away, or I say away as if we're in some distant land. I moved to Sidcup, born and bred in Lewisham, up to Sham, Blue Borough, till I die. But I moved from Bromley, which is where I was pretty much spent the majority of my childhood from year 7 onwards. I moved from Bromley to Sidcup. So we moved to kind of where near a lot of her friends were. And when we broke up, I was very isolated. I was thrown into a bodybuilding prep, which, to be honest, was probably quite a good thing for me at that time. It allowed me to just simply eat, sleep, train and repeat, and inevitably ended up winning the show, which is a bonus. But at that particular point in my life, very little friends around me, even though they were only like 40 or 50 minutes away, isolated, broke up with my long-term partner, and felt extremely vulnerable. And it was around about that time towards the end of the bodybuilding show, which it almost masked it a little bit. The bodybuilding show allowed me to accept and start to internalize what had gone wrong in my relationship, but at the same time, it masked a lot of it. So it wasn't until the bodybuilding show had ended and that was the prep done, and I was sort of left there like, okay, now, like, I've big old life decision right now, and that stress and impact started to creep in the form of digestive discomfort and feeling very isolated. And lo and behold, when I did move back to Bromley, I started to notice these symptoms: blood in my stool, the ability to not digest foods that I digested so very well in my life started to be apparent. So that was my warning sign. So blood in my stool, issues with my digestion. Went to go and get a stool test from my GP, and the inflammatory markers came back massively, some extremely high numbers. Now, this came at a point where I was about to go to Ibiza. So I had 4 weeks in Ibiza planned, still planned to go. My doctor was like, look, you're going to an environment that's relatively low stress, good food, plenty of sun. So I was in Ibiza of May 2023, I think it was, with active colitis, with no drugs. I was still eating and drinking alcohol, but lo and behold, my symptoms were pretty low. And again, that just falls into what we'll talk about, stress management and mindfulness and meditation shortly. But it just goes to show active inflammation, not in a good position, in a country like Ibiza, good food, plenty of sun, and my symptoms were okay. It wasn't until I got back and those symptoms started to increase again. Lots of blood in my stool, very, very scary as a man or woman to see that. And don't ignore it, okay? I know what it's like, us blokes, when we go to the toilet and we see blood in the stool, we think, oh, it's probably piles, or it's probably just I've drunk too much, there's a bit of inflammation. Go and see a doctor. Just, even if it's to be safe, get some blood work ran. If they go and send you for a colonoscopy and they see no inflammation, then okay, maybe it's not as serious as we thought it would be, but get on top of it quickly, because the more that you are in active inflammation, the more risk you have of cancers, the more risk you have of that disease progressing, okay? So that's just a little bit of a backstory. I went and got my colonoscopy. Very unpleasant. I declined any form of, not anesthetic, but any form of sedation. I was just like, you know what, get the camera up. Should have listened to him and said, give me the drugs. But it was a very unpleasant 20 minutes, okay? They put the camera inside you, it goes all the way. You can feel it, and they take little biopsies. It's grim. It's not nice at all. Just to highlight, I have proctitis. So my ulcerative colitis is just subject to the rectum area. And you can see every time you put a camera in, it's like a, what's those sweets? Those squashy sweets, you know, when you've got the red and the white. That's what mine looks like. You can see the inflammation there, and you can see normal, healthy gut. And that's what it did show on the camera. Gut all the way up to the top was perfect. No issues at all. So mine's just this really little stubborn area by the rectum. So mine, in theory, can be treated with suppositories, okay? Now, the drug protocol that you'll be more than likely put on, excuse me, based on the severity of your illness, is some form of 5-ASA, like a mesalazine, a mesalamine. So I say depending on the severity. If you've been diagnosed and it's quite severe, then they may now adopt a top-down approach, whereby they introduce something like a biologic, or maybe like an immunomodulator like azathioprine or mercaptopurine, which is, I mean, they're tough on the immune system. There's a lot more targeted drugs nowadays to target the inflammatory response in the gut. So basically, the autoimmune disease, colitis, UC, is your own gut's attacking itself, basically, and we want to dampen down that response. So if you're quite severe, you get the colonoscopy done, and they're like, this ain't looking good. They may give you a course of steroids to get that inflammation under control, and then they may start like a top-down approach, biologic, or even like a JAK inhibitor. And if that puts you in remission, they may take you off of that and put you on like a 5-ASA as an example. If your disease is maybe moderate, it's not too bad at all. Mine was moderate. They'll give you a 5-ASA, like a mesalazine, either a pill form or, in my case, a rectal. So I didn't respond to that first line treatment. I had really quite severe, ended up putting me in hospital. I had to go to A&E. It was horrible. As I began to take this drug, this left side, this kind of sigmoid colon of mine, just became more and more painful day in, day out, to the point where I'd put a suppository in, I was out of it. I remember I couldn't eat, my mouth was dry. So on the very, I'd say it's quite rare chance, you may be intolerant to a 5-ASA, okay? Most people, if you're newly diagnosed and it's under control, you may not even need steroids. They'll give you a 5-ASA, it calms the inflammation, and you may experience flares in your life, high periods of stress, maybe pushing ultra-processed foods too much, and you may experience that flare. But for the vast majority of people, you'll respond to a 5-ASA very well. If you don't, maybe don't respond, they may introduce something like a JAK inhibitor, which is what I'm on right now. It's a very small set of molecules. Or you may have like a biologic, like an infusion. Infliximab, as an example, maybe one that they put you on. So in terms of drug progression, 5-ASA, potentially the incorporation of a steroid to calm it if you're in quite a bad flare, that may then increase too. I don't know whether or not they've swapped biologics and JAK inhibitors now, because I think because the research is so strong on JAK inhibitors and it working so quickly, it didn't work so quickly for me, but it works very, very quickly for a lot of people. So if you're in the midst of quite a high flare, not responding to a 5-ASA, they may introduce a JAK inhibitor, and within a week, you may see a dampening of symptoms. So I think based on the time that it takes for the infusions to get into your system, they're now shifting that towards later on in your drug cycle and introducing a JAK inhibitor off the back of a 5-ASA to begin with. So that's the sort of drug route of where things are going. A big bonus of where Western medicine, and not on the fence, I completely appreciate and am in admiration of the scientific breakthroughs that we're seeing in terms of drug development, but I'm always in a position, it's like, and this is a lot of Gabor Mate's influence, like it's like how much of the issues can be met with compassion and therapy and understanding versions of the self, and maybe holding off on the drugs and going through certain dietary protocols. And you'll notice that as well. People that have been diagnosed with colitis, you ask your doctor, what should I eat? It don't matter. Now you've just been diagnosed with a gut disorder and a doctor saying it don't matter. So I remember saying to him, what, I can continue to have just a McDonald's here and there and I can have my dairy? Yeah, fine. There's not enough research to show that there's a direct correlation between food and the instance of colitis. And I'm like, come on now. Come on. And then the old tin hat comes out. I'm like, is this some sort of conspiratorial issue? Are they saying eat what you want so it feeds into colitis and more money for big pharma? That's where my brain goes, right? And where a lot of people's brain goes nowadays. But diet has such a big influence. We know it. Anyone watching this video who has colitis, Crohn's, we know that when we are on point with our diet, we can massively see some reductions in symptoms. So this segues me into diet. I would say if you are newly diagnosed, get rid of the irritants. When we discuss irritants, we're looking at caffeine. I know, beloved coffee, unfortunately, I had to stop it for a long time, which is horrible. I'd even go as far as to say maybe not even include decaf. So it could potentially be the coffee within itself that's causing some form of issue with your gut. Teas are fine, maybe decaf teas that aren't too heavy in caffeine, but I'd maybe go things like peppermint or green tea as an example, jasmine tea, which has also been proven very beneficial for just calming things down in the gut. You know, if you've had a big Domino's pizza and you have like a peppermint tea the day after or the hour after, it tends to settle things a little bit. So I'd leverage with those sort of flavored teas as an example. But irritants we refer to, caffeine, get rid of, gluten, get rid of, dairy, get rid of. Now, we're in a time whereby, due to them vegans, the old vegans, putting up their good fight, we're in a time whereby there are so many alternatives to our beloved foods that we like to consume, particularly from a dairy standpoint. So, I mean, I have dairy-free feta, dairy-free halloumi, yogurts. There's so much nowadays which massively benefits us lot with GI issues that we can opt for vegan or non-dairy. So gluten, I know what it's like. No one seems to have nailed a gluten-free wrap. I can't get my hands on a good gluten-free wrap nowadays, but there are so many gluten-free sourdough bread, pasta options, and you get used to it pretty quickly. If you go up to Borough Market on a Saturday, there's a really good stall that does gluten-free goods. Their bagels are exceptional. Can't tell the difference. So whenever I'm in the midst of a flare or I'm like, okay, I need to get a handle on my nutrition a little bit because things aren't feeling too good, gluten-free, dairy-free, no caffeine. Obviously, I'm having it now. I'm consuming it now. It seems like things have calmed down a lot since my diagnosis, but get rid of those irritants. Okay, it's a must. The work that's being done at the moment, there's an individual who goes by the name of Dr. Charlie Lees on YouTube, who's fantastic. And the work that his team are doing up in Edinburgh in terms of prevention, in terms of cure, the most recent PREDICT study that followed participants from 2017 to 2020, I think it was, that looked at the response of ultra-processed foods. And we can get into UPF. You know, I've been very vocal about UPF, and may I just add, I bloody love the stuff. You know, I had my first Domino's in about, God, however many months the other week. I won't do it again because it was just a one-time thing. I thought, you know what, I fancy a Domino's, I'll get it. But it's the frequent occurrence of the daily UPF consumption that I'm kind of advocating against. And we've come to blows, a few of the subscribers that watch, about my stance on UPF, and we're now seeing instances with data, again from the PREDICT study, that UPF may not be the cause or catalyst. Maybe slightly different for Crohn's. It's actually highlighting some quite negative, quite stark research on the incidence of UPF and individuals with Crohn's, but it's very hard to sit here and say, right, UPF is causing colitis. We've got to look at it as one of the many fractures. Okay, if we look at things like ultra-processed food, environmental, stress, waters, poor sleep, they're tiny little fractures. Imagine yourself as an individual and you've got this shell around you, an impenetrable shell, and things like UPF, things like poor sleep, recovery, stress, trauma, they can impact that. And it may get to a point whereby you're all good consuming ultra-processed food for years, but the body may get to a point you're like, boom, I'm done. And could my excessive consumption of ultra-processed foods when I was pushing scale weight up during my bodybuilding years be a byproduct of why I have stomach issues today? Potentially. Let's also not look at the fact that I used to slam a load of gear. I used to take clenbuterol, T3. I used to take your Himbine on empty stomach with caffeines. All of these things could also have impacted my stomach. But we have to be really careful about our language being used around ultra-processed foods. And look, I hold my hands up, and maybe I was a bit too brash when I started to talk about them, but it came from a place of genuine concern. You know, listening to the likes of Dr. Charlie Lee, seeing the work that's being done and how negatively UPF can impact the gut microbiome. We've got to be careful. Like, we do need to raise awareness. I don't mind moderation, that's all good, but daily consumption of it, we need to be very careful. The PREDICT study also highlighted the instances of excessive meat consumption and also depression feeding into colitis and Crohn's disease. So we've seen a lot of research on how beneficial like a vegan or vegetarian diet can be on symptom management for individuals with Crohn's and colitis. The only caveat with that is that when you're in an active flare, you consuming a lot of fruit and veg is probably the worst thing that you want to do. So this is an area that we've got to be really careful of when it comes down to fiber recommendations. If you're in an active flare and you've just been diagnosed, I'd be very cautious with fiber intake. At the same time, we still want the positive byproduct of what fibrous foods give us in terms of improvements in the gut microbiome, in terms of the antioxidants in which these foods give us, but it can be a real pain. I noticed that if I have too much higher fiber, my stomach's like, careful Tom, pull it back a little bit. We can still consume things like sweet potato, carrots, plums, peaches, bananas, berries, but I'd say be mindful of those leafy greens. Leafy greens for me still are not that great. Broccoli, cauliflower is a no-go for me. Make sure it's cooked. Maybe de-skin things like tomatoes. Try and stay clear of things like seeds. These things can really irritate the gut massively, okay? So referring again to irritants and removing caffeine, gluten, dairy, fiber, bit of a grey area, but just be very mindful of the amount of fiber that you're getting. Now, in terms of nutritional approaches, I responded really well to low FODMAP, okay? If you type in low FODMAP diet on Google, you will see a list now of high and low FODMAP, okay? I'd err on the side of caution when maybe looking at certain foods that are higher FODMAP. You can include a little bit of them. When you're active flaring and when you have just been newly diagnosed and you're trying to get this bastard of a disease under control, leverage with low FODMAP, okay? There's going to be a few foods in there that kind of cross the line of like, well, they're good for me, but they're high FODMAP. I noticed when I went from high to low, an immediate alleviation, okay? I pushed gluten too hard. I thought, sourdough's brilliant. I can have my passes. It's not affecting me too much. When I got rid of that gluten intake before I went to Ibiza, my word, bloating had gone, no issue, symptoms really reduced massively. So you're going to have to kind of grin and bear it. Get rid of your beloved coffees and your glutens and your dairies. But it's important to note, and this is when we're going to come on to testing. Intolerance testing, in my opinion, there's not enough hard evidence to show that IgG testing, which is what a lot of these tests do, even work, okay? A lot of the time, individuals with Crohn's or colitis who get an intolerance test, I mean, they could be all over the place. So I've got like 3 or 4 different intolerance tests, and they all came back with varying degrees of what I'm intolerant to. It's very rare that when you get diagnosed with colitis, you're then somehow diagnosed with an intolerance to a certain food. When you have active inflammation, there will be certain foods that you may feel like you're intolerant to. Once that inflammation is under control, you can then slowly start to reincorporate the foods that you weren't really allowed to have, your glutens, your dairies, as an example. Don't go all guns blazing and think, right, I'm in remission, my stomach's good. Bring on the Dominoes, bring on the cheeses, bring on all the gluten and all the carbohydrates. Be mindful. And this is where having a notebook and testing foods is so very important to do, because you may be in remission, stomach's good. Okay, this week I'm going to introduce a little bit of gluten. So for dinners, I'm going to have some pastas. Monday through to Friday, make a note. What's my stools like? What's my stomach like? What's my digestion like? All good? Perfect. We know that pasta's okay. Let's now incorporate maybe a little bit of dairy. Let's add some feta cheese in as an example. So building a portfolio is key. It's very, very important indeed. So low FODMAP, most certainly. Fasting, intermittent fasting, getting in some form of extended bout of fast, 16, 18, even 24 hours work massively. Give that GI, give that gut a rest. Carnivore. So carnivore, under the basis of it being a fantastic elimination diet, I would recommend. I don't think it's very sustainable, because a lot of people watching this will be athletes and will be training in the gym or running. I don't think, and obviously the carnivore crew will argue until they're blue in the face, I don't think it's a very sustainable diet. I also think it impacts negatively the gut microbiome in terms of a lack of diversity. This is when things like vegan diets show a massive microbiome diversity. It's good to do short term. In the midst of a flare, go carnivore. Maybe be careful about the eggs, but things like fish, meat, crack on. Brilliant for satiety. Might end up losing a few kilos of fat as well, because satiety is through the roof. I would say carnivore is a good elimination diet, but one that I maybe wouldn't recommend as a long term. Okay, if you feel like you're responding really well to it, energy levels are good, you've got that mental clarity, things are all good, then mate, stick on it. But I'd say let's slowly start to introduce some foods after a few weeks and when symptoms are reduced. Okay, so most certainly low FODMAP, intermittent fasting, and carnivore. Okay, I've got point 3 here, stress and sleep, and therapy for me was massive. So I signed myself up to some therapy via the Bromley IAP team. It was a little bit of a waiting list, and I would say maybe it's a little bit wrong of me to say like lay it on thick, but when we need stuff being done in the NHS, we need to lay it on a little bit thick. So I went in there and I was like, look, I'm suffering really bad here. The psychological component of being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease is massive. When I was first diagnosed, it was met with positivity. I was like, you know what? I've been dealt this card in my life. I'm mentally and physically very resilient. Let's get cracking. When the response to these 5 ASAs didn't occur and I was still bleeding and still discomfort, this started to melt. It started to break down, and it was horrible. There were some real low points, yeah? Some real fucking low points. It was horrific. I remember many instances just breaking down. I wasn't getting any better. I catastrophized over the thought of the end product being very close, i.e. getting that colostomy bag. Like for me, I thought it was a given. I wasn't responding to anything. The only thing that I was responding to was a steroid called prednisolone, which would keep things calm. I thought, that's it, my life's over, I'm getting a colostomy bag. And the universe works in very mysterious ways, in the sense that when I was at my lowest, I got the call from the NHS team and said, look, we're going to put you on some CBT, some cognitive behavioural therapy, which for me, who's very meticulous and methodical, responded to very well. Very, very well. I think CBT is brilliant for people that love to sit down and really depict and get given homework and break down certain things. For me, was a lifesaver. It really was, quite literally. Yeah, I mean, I had some very, very depressive low points. Awful. It was the lowest I've been, and yeah, not nice at all, right? Not nice at all. When you can't get a handle on something, and I've been very good at, here's an issue, I'm good at finding the root cause, let me sort it out. When that's broken and I can't find it and I can't get better, this goes to pot. It really did. So I had 2 bouts of CBT. Most recent one was a higher CBT. Basically, at the end of my initial CBT, they said, "Look, Tom, your scores are pretty fucked up still, mate, and we're going to keep you on the books." So I said, that's absolutely fine. Waiting list was a couple of months, and then I was back into with a higher individual on CBT, and I finished that a couple of weeks ago, which is brilliant. A lot to learn from that. So stress, sleep is key. It is paramount. It's number one. We, within the colitis community, know firsthand, if we start to see instances of our stomach getting worse, it's normally because we're not sleeping very well, we're too stressed, we're not practicing our mindfulness, we're not taking some time in the morning or evening to practice meditation, breathing techniques, and I do it, okay? I take for granted what CBT gave me, what journaling gave me, and meditation. And sometimes, and this happens to everyone, when we're in a good area in life, we don't do it. We fall back, we think, there's no point in me doing any meditation, I'm all good. Last Monday, my left-sided pain started to increase again. I was feeling a little bit stressed. I was thinking, what am I doing differently? I'm still eating all right. I'm not journaling, I'm not meditating, I'm not practicing my gratitude, I'm not taking time away, I'm too stressed. And lo and behold, 4 or 5 days in, back into my IBFA routine, I call it. I haven't quite got the weather in the balcony, but I go back to leaving my phone on my bedside, waking up, nice little lemon tea, practicing my gratitude, my journal, back upstairs, meditation, breath work, walk the dog, bit of greenery, and I feel it inside. And that's massive. Stress and sleep is key, and also therapy too. What I would say, as soon as you get that colitis diagnosis, I'd be inclined to say, sign up for some therapy. If you can afford it financially to get some therapy straight away through counselling, CBT, do it if you've got the funds to do it. If not, sign yourself up to an NHS, because there may be a bit of a waiting list, but I think it's key. As I said at the beginning of this video, if we can somehow create a bill whereby individuals that have been diagnosed with autoimmune disorders received alongside their drug treatment some form of therapy, then I think we'd be in a really good spot. It will help you massively. It really will. Having someone each week for an hour or two to use as a punch bag to tell them how you're feeling, it really helps. Okay. So we've covered drug, progression, diet, stress, sleep, mitigation, management. Now on to supplementation. Okay, so they most certainly have a small percentage impact on stress management. So I would say things like L-glutamine that can promote and help mucosal healing. So like 5 grams upon wake every single morning. Things like turmeric as a natural anti-inflammatory. You can get a really good product from Supplement Needs called liposomal curcumin. It's part of their liposomal range. Okay, so I'd recommend an L-glutamine, a turmeric. Here we've got probiotic. I've got a bit of a question mark around probiotic because sometimes the bacteria within a probiotic can actually cause more harm than good. So you may want to introduce a probiotic when there's some form of remission or symptoms are okay. Okay, if you're newly diagnosed, active flare, maybe steer clear of the probiotic to begin with, and then introduce. We have a big correlation with gut dysbiosis and colitis. So if we can get a handle on our gut and improvements in the bacteria and the biome through fiber, through a lack of ultra processed foods, through maybe potential reductions in red meat or meat in general, more fruit, more veg, probiotics, then happy days. We've also got here BPC 157, which I'm sure many of you have heard, a fantastic drug, either taken orally or via injectable, subcutaneous injection. We could potentially do a whole new video on BPC and its gut healing benefits. A lot of people who have got Crohn's and colitis, and you can notice this anecdotally through forums, have done very well, responded very well to BPC 157. Okay, so I may have a little look into that. I've got things like methyl B complex. Again, B complex, very important for the growth of of gut bacteria as well. I would say other things like sauna, cold plunge are fantastic. I've got here nicotine as well. Nicotine's an interesting one because on the one hand, what we don't want to recommend is individuals start smoking, because then you open yourself up to a cohort of the impact of what smoking does. So if you want to kind of siphon off nicotine and maybe look to consume it via, I'd say let's look at the ones that aren't going to prove much of a risk. Transdermal, so transdermal nicotine patches, which are actually being used in some studies with individuals with colitis. Transdermal. Second to that would maybe be a gum, like a heavy dose gum. Third to that would then be something like a vape. Okay, a bit on the fence with where vapes sit. We're probably going to be all dealt horrible cards in years to come. Studies that have said, right, vapes are going to take years off our life. We still don't know a lot about vapes. They're not that great, let's be honest. But from apologies, the camera cut out, which was my 30 minutes. So I appreciate I'm talking a lot here. So yeah, just on nicotine in terms of the research on mucosal healing, it seems to be quite a lot of benefit. We refer to colitis as the disease of the non-smoker. There's not many smokers that have got colitis because of the nicotine that they're consuming. Potentially the other ingredients within the cigarettes that people are smoking. But I would say nicotine, let's try and siphon that off and see how you get on, maybe supplement with that as well. I've also got sexual health testing here. Now, a lot of individuals who have been diagnosed with colitis, there are some diseases, some sexual health, some sexual diseases that can actually impact the gut. So I would, it may not be likely, but it's one thing that you can cross off the list, is get yourself some form of quite large sexual health screening to see the impact or to see if there is any issue with your sexual health. There's been quite a few cases of individuals with certain sexual health diseases that have caused an inflammation in the gut. The NHS obviously don't tell you this, or certain doctors may or may not tell you this, but that's when we've got to take it upon ourselves to actually get some form of screening done. So, you know, if you've been diagnosed with colitis, you get a sexual health test done, it comes back with something or other, you get a handle on that, and then it sorts out your colitis, then brilliant, happy days. But I would say, yeah, sexual health testing, screening, most certainly get it done as well, and always a good thing to do, innit? See if you've got any diseases lurking about, many silent sexual health disorders that we don't know about. So yeah, I hope that covers, it's a lot to take in, I appreciate. It's a lot to take in. The disease in general is an horrible disease, and it comes and goes, and it really does. And even individuals that have got it in remission, you may experience flares in your life, and it's important to turn on psychologically and to use your newfound respect and information from your therapy as well. When we look at prevention, so this is a point that I've got here finally. A lot of the work that's being done up in Edinburgh by Dr. Charlie Lees is the prevention of these diseases, and now they're doing a lot of testing that can actually look at antibodies and microbiome signatures 5-10 years in advancement. So we could have, and I didn't mention at the beginning, but colitis, Crohn's, there's a big genetic component. Okay, so that a lot of us may be genetically predisposed to having this condition and any autoimmune disorder or disease in general. And we refer to those fractures, we refer to the ultra processed foods, we refer to the stresses that can then penetrate that predisposition to a certain disease, and then boom, it's out in the open. So when we do talk about ultra processed foods, it's coming from a point of view of prevention of these diseases. A lot of the time we don't know. Okay, we don't know that we may be sitting on a certain type of gene within our body that overconsumption of UPS may actually be causing a detriment to us. There's going to be people in life that can slam the UPF all of their life, not have any long-term health impact, which I highly disagree. I'm sure if you were to slam UPF on a daily basis, something or other would happen to you. You know, probably from a lipid profile point of view, I don't know, from a digestion standpoint. Let's just be really mindful of UPF consumption, okay? Because the work that's being done is now shining quite a large light on the impact of what UPF does, not only to the gut, but also psychologically as well. You know, going off on a bit of a tangent here when it comes down to UPF discussion, but when we do discuss it, and more so from a fitness standpoint, our main priority is that the calorie deficit, all right? Not a lot of individuals may have the psychological resilience to just have a cookie. So when we talk about the frequency of UPF, and it's okay to have it in moderate consumption, for some people they may not be able to have it in moderate consumption. For some people, a bit like alcohol, they may not be able to just stop at one drink. I can't do it, right? If you give me a cookie from a pack of Marylands, I can't have one. I'm not my mum. My mum, if she's watching this, bless her, she can have a Fox's. You know those Fox's chocolate coated biscuits? My word, they're a good biscuit. She can have half of that and wrap the other half in some cling film and have that later on in the week. And I'm not joking, right? They're very good at that. She's very good at that. I can't do that. I'm like my dad. If someone gives us a Victoria sponge, we're having the whole thing. So I've got to be really careful from a psychological component of like exposing myself to this food, because unfortunately I don't really have that discipline in me to stop. You know, I like to think of myself as a mentally and physically strong person. Sometimes I've got my kryptonite. My kryptonite is the cookie. My kryptonite is the McDonald's, you know. I can have these things infrequently now, probably once or twice a month if I fancy a little bit on a Sunday towards the end of a heavy, intense training block. I'll still incorporate that within my calories for the day. So if I fancy a pack of cookies or a sleeve of cookies, I know it's got 1,000 calories in. I'm going to have 1,500 calories through good food, 1,000 calories through cookies. I don't do that a lot. Very infrequent right now. Again, it impacts my training. I noticed that if I have a McDonald's or a pack of cookies, the next day I feel like hungover. I feel like I don't even want to do this session anymore. So that's like one of my reasons why I can't really have that consumption anymore. Went off on a really big tangent there, but I hope that video has proved a bit of a stress relief for some. There is plenty of support and help out of there. The Crohn's and Colitis forums on the NHS. I appreciate when you are first diagnosed, you don't feel very thought after. You know, when I was initially diagnosed, I was just another statistic. That's what it felt like anyway. I'd go to my doctor GP wouldn't know a lot about it. My GP would then say, well, you've got to go and speak to our IBD team. At that point, I wasn't part of an IBD team. It was only until my disease got a little worse and I wasn't getting better, and I was put on these JAK inhibitors, when I was then part of the IBD team. And now I've got an IBD hotline, which you can all call. May take a couple of days to get back to you, but if you've got any concern, ring them up. They'll get back to you and they'll give you some form of help. Okay, there's plenty of help out there. There's plenty more research. There is so much. The positive is that we are finding more and more information about how we can control this disease, about new drug protocols. But at the same time, as much as me saying drugs are great, let's also meet that with compassion. Let's also use this as an opportunity to look back and go, okay, what's happened in my life that's maybe caused this issue right now? My body's not very happy, and it's come out in ways of autoimmune disorders and diseases. Deep dive on the likes of Gabor Mate, Eckhart Tolle and Joe Dispenza. Start to learn a little bit more about yourself, okay, because it's so very, very important. Hope you enjoy this video. Sorry it's been a very, very long one, but yeah, hopefully it's helped a few people. I would love to continue doing videos like this, you know, on diet, on the psychological responses, on whatever it is, because I'm very passionate about it, and I think it's important that we, or anyone for that matter, raise awareness about this disease, because it is a real pain in the arse, quite literally. So yeah, I'll leave things there. Hope all is well. Hang in there. Things will get better. They really will. If you are someone that is at the bottom of the barrel right now, don't worry. It will get better. Sometimes, what's the quote? Sometimes we feel like we've been buried, but we've actually been planted. Something like that. But yeah, hang in there. It does get a lot better, and use me as a bit of a punch bag if you need to. Ask some questions. I'm more than happy to help. Okay, I'll love you and leave you. Thank you, good night, and much love.